illegal because the strategy was to divide and conquer, to keep those who were freed from slavery and who had worked out of their indentured contracts from ever uniting again. When the rebellion happened, it was blacks, whites, Europeans, all coming together because they were together locked into a social class that could not progress. And the elites had the brilliance to understand, why don't we create whiteness? Which means that if you're white and a peasant, you're closer to being a white elite than you'll ever be to being a black. And that's what kept now whites who didn't have from ever uniting with blacks who didn't have. And that's why whites always think now, I'm closer to being an alignment with the elite white who's in power and in office. I wish y'all could catch this. I'll never unite with those who are trying to get their true freedom because I've been told I'm white like the elites.
Hi, this is Bishop James Dixon. Welcome to the Empowered by Faith broadcast, brought to you by James Dixon Ministries and the Community of Faith Church based in Houston, Texas. We would love for you to visit us, in fact, because we are a battleship church. Maybe you're looking for a church that's serious about making a difference and an impact. Well, that is the COF. We're a battleship impacting poverty, crime, homelessness, sex and human trafficking. We're doing the real work outside of the church walls. Got that? In fact, today's message is the beginning of a new series entitled A Prophetic Call to Justice for such a time as this. During racial discrimination and oppression and all sorts of ills, we've got to have a prophetic call to justice. So be sure to tune in Monday through Friday right here on theCUBE for this powerful new series and tell all your friends about it. And after this brief announcement and video, I'll be back with the word for today.
These are perilous times for America. The social climate is impacted by racial injustice, a broken criminal justice system that unjustly punishes poor people and people of color. The ongoing story of police brutality against unarmed people has strained relationships between the community and law enforcement. And add to this, the voter suppression movement, where states like Texas are enacting laws that are designed to decrease black and brown voter participation. So, what does the church do in the midst of this kind of social turmoil? Well, the church should be doing what Bishop James Dixon and the Community of Faith is doing. We are leading the fight for justice, equality, and righteousness. I am glad to be a part of a church that doesn't remain silent when unarmed men and women are being killed by police. Everyone knows that Bishop Dixon is God's voice for social justice and for positive changes in our society. Some people talk it, Bishop Dixon walks it. Yes, the Community of Faith keeps proving that it's a battleship church, not a cruise ship. In addition to being an anointed preacher and pastor, Bishop Dixon is a real leader who serves to empower his community. So you see him in Austin at the Capitol, challenging lawmakers to pass laws to combat child sex trafficking. Bishop Dixon is there to fight against voter suppression. You see him standing with other leaders, speaking truth to power in behalf of the less fortunate. I am happy to partner with Bishop Dixon because I know he's not in it for himself. He's dedicated to the hard work of fighting for the people. That's why, my friends, you should partner with James Dixon Ministries. Praying and supporting James Dixon Ministries makes a much needed difference. So go to jamesdixonministries.org to become a partner today. We thank God for your support. And if you're looking for a church, a real church, a battleship church, look no further. You found it. It's the Community of Faith, and we welcome you to your new church family.
Destructive force it has been on the entire American fabric. You're not responsible for the fact that it did happen, but you need to know that it did and need to understand what we can do collectively at a time like this in order for us to undo it. We can't get over it unless we undo it. If it wasn't still happening, then maybe we could get over it. But the effects of history affect the present. Yes. God is calling for us to really undo injustice and inequity, and to destroy every tenet of racism that exists systemically and structurally in policy and in practice. Well, let me give you just a little bit of information here today that might assist you with your understanding. You see, you have to research back to the early 1600s. Did you not know in the early 1600s the concept of white did not exist? Did not exist. But you've got to go back to 1664 to understanding the Bacon Rebellion. Back in Virginia, when the colonial, yes, well, I'm back into something now. When Britain was sending to America indentured workers because of the outburst in population growth in Britain, there were too many poor people, Brits, who were on the doles of the government. They needed government assistance to survive, and so they willingly put them on ships and sent them to the American colonies, to the British colonies in America, to do work on the farms and the plantations of the tobacco growers. That was not black people. Those were Brits that the Brits sent over because they had too much population growth of the poor. And they sent poor people on ships to the colonies here in what's now the Americas, Virginia and Maryland, primarily because the primary economy was based on tobacco. And that required heavy sources of labor. And so the Brits sent cheap labor over, and most came as indentured servants and others as slaves, and they were not black. But when that population growth ceased in Britain, and they needed a workforce, a labor force to replace that, that's what made the African slave trade viable. You got to understand that it was Bacon's rebellion. Read about it in 1664. He rebelled against Governor Berkeley over territorial rights dealing with the Indians, with the indigenous people. And it was then that because Bacon amassed a group of indentured servants and slaves that were, yes, white and black and indigenous people, and mounted a campaign against the governor. And almost won, but took out some 30% of the governor's forces. And that's when they decided we got to divide and conquer the peasants because there are too many of them against a few elites. So when you understand now the divide and conquer codes that came after the Bacon Rebellion, that's where slavery was invented based on whiteness. Whiteness got invented as a way to keep the peasants from ever uniting again. Most people haven't studied that history. And you know why? It's not in American textbooks in school. And the reason it's not in American textbooks in schools is because ignorance is the easiest thing to mislead. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. You see, but because we've never learned this history, never been taught this history, we think racism happened a few years ago. No, it became legal because the strategy was to divide and conquer, to keep those who were freed from slavery and who had worked out of their indentured contracts from ever uniting again. When the rebellion happened, it was blacks, whites, Europeans all coming together because they were together locked into a social class that could not progress. All right. And the elites had the brilliance to understand, why don't we create whiteness? Which means that if you're white and a peasant, you're closer to being a white elite than you'll ever be to being a black. And that's what kept now whites who didn't have from ever uniting with blacks who didn't have. And that's why whites always think now, I'm closer to being in alignment with the elite white who's in power and in office. I wish y'all could catch this. I'll never unite with those who are trying to get their true freedom because I've been told I'm white like the elites. Oh, I wish I had time to teach today. This is the history that we are based on, and it's divide and conquer. It's in the divide and conquer codes that it was determined no black could ever marry a non-black or white. It's in the divide and conquer code that no black men would be prohibited from having weapons or guns of any type. It's in the divide and...
Isn't this message impactful? And there's more of it to come. But I want to remind you to follow me on social media, because when you do that, you can keep on all the things that we're doing 7 days a week. Our church never takes an off day. We're busy doing the work of the kingdom of Jesus Christ. People say to me often, wow, your church is so busy and you all are doing so much. Well, why not? We've got poverty, we've got homelessness, we've got hunger, we have sex and human trafficking, we got racism and injustice. We've got to be about our Father's business, and that's what we're doing every day. So when you partner with us, you become a part of the difference we get to make together for the glory of God. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for your prayers and for your support. Now, back to the Word.
This is the history that we are based on, and it's divide and conquer. It's in the divide and conquer codes that it was determined no black could ever marry a non-black or white. It's in the divide and conquer code that no black men would be prohibited from having weapons or guns of any type. It's in the divide and conquer code that blacks could not vote or hold office any longer. Before that, blacks could go to office. In the divide and conquer code, that's it, colonialism, you got it. Blacks were not allowed or would be prohibited from ever testifying in court against the white. All of the laws we see on the books that are being used against blacks today to keep us oppressed, that was put into the divide and conquer code in the 1600s. And we're dealing now with the vestiges of those codes today. Yes, this is history. I'm not making this up, but most of us don't read. Most of us don't study. And it's by design that the textbooks don't have it in the content. Well, when we talk about a prophetic call for justice, this is the number one issue of our nation. Nothing is going to work until we get this right. Nothing is going to work. And so what do you do at a time like this? First of all, we need to acknowledge that injustice based on racism is our problem. The most difficult thing for us to do is to admit it. A few years ago, when Mr. Colin Kaepernick had the courage to take a knee on the sideline, protesting police brutality, listen to all of the rhetoric that came attacking his convictions. From even the top office in the land, the man was called, and those who knelt with him were called SOBs, by the president of the nation, to turn the conversation away from police brutality and to make it about the flag. He was not kneeling in protest to a flag. He was kneeling in protest to innocent blood being shed by black youth, particularly black men, on the streets of America at the hands of deranged police officers who, even when it was proven they were guilty, got no sentence for the crime. But rather than admit it, rather than acknowledge a problem, America decided to change the conversation to something about patriotism, when I believe that the most patriotic thing one could do is decide to take a knee on behalf of innocent Americans who are being shot down by other Americans wearing badges. Lest we forget, Trayvon Martin was an American. lest we forget Eric Garner was an American. Lest we forget Philando Castile was an American. Lest we forget Breonna Taylor was an American. Lest we forget George Floyd was an American. Admit it. Admit the fact that the wealth gap is out of sorts. Admit the fact that criminal justice is out of sorts. Admit the fact that discrimination in hiring and in firing is a problem. Admit the fact that even during COVID-19, blacks and other minorities are suffering greater because of systemic injustices in health care and in wealth. Admit the fact that ghettos were created by poisonous policies that came out of American systems of government. Admit the fact. Can you just admit it? Can you just admit it? That we're not just whiners and complainers, but we got evidence, statistics, and we've lived the experience. For those of you who are thinking it's a hoax and a cry for self-made victimization, live a day in a black man's shoes and see what it feels like to be pulled over by a police officer when you are just coming from church and your car is surrounded by officers with their guns drawn and you've done nothing wrong, not even run a stop sign. That's my story. Admit it. Acknowledge that we have a problem. And then assess the damages. Assess the situation. Look at it underneath to see what's really there. Learn about the policies of redlining. Learn about the mishandling of FHA that was not created to aid all returning World War II soldiers and veterans, but it was done to lift up white middle-class people out of the military, and that's why blacks were largely left out. Admit the disinvestment in infrastructure in black neighborhoods across America is what created ghettos. Admit the fact that property taxes supporting schools and school districts in poor communities kept black schools poor and made white schools rich. Admit the fact. Assess it. Look at it. Evaluate it. Study it. Understand it. And let me say this. We've got too many educators who are ignorant. If you're going to be an educator, you've got to be a liberator. We need educators who are knowledgeable enough to really understand the history and the systemic issues that blacks and other minorities have faced so that you go into the classroom as a revolutionary in order to empower the disempowered and to lift those who've been down, not because they are not smart, but because they haven't had access to systems of power. Acknowledge it, then assess it. And then, after assessing, decide to abstain from it. That simply means don't participate in furthering the structural and systemic works of racism and discrimination. Because every white person gets in rooms that black people don't get in. That's a part of white privilege and white prerogative. You get in rooms, you get to the board tables, you have the conversations, you hear what's being discussed. Abstain from it. Have the courage. Have the courage. Have the courage to say, I will not participate in those activities that will undermine the success of every student. Then, not only in abstention, but then attack it. If you want to be used by God, white preacher, you want to be used by God, white evangelical church, you want to be used by God, black pulpiteer, you want to be used by God, we've got to together attack racism, attack discrimination, attack injustice. It won't go away by itself. The law in physics called the law or the principle of inertia is at work. Inertia simply means leave something alone and it will stay the same. But you've got to understand what we've done in America is we've attempted, even good people who don't mean any harm. You say, but I'm not a racist. I'm not a bigot. I'm not calling you one. But the question is, what are you doing to attack the situation? What are you doing to engage in the change? Because right now we need every born-again believer, every person of faith, every person who believes you're decent to get involved in the war against racism and against discrimination and against injustice. It is not enough to say, I didn't do anything to cause the problem. The question is, what are you doing to solve the problem? Your bar is too low if you only want to not be a part of making it happen problematically. That's a low bar. Today, God is calling on people like you and me of good conscience, of good spirit, of good nature, who have well intentions to get involved with solving the problem. Inertia says that things left alone will stay the same until it is met with a force that contradicts that reality that has greater power than the reality itself. And I came by to say to you today, there ought to be a righteous force. There should be a moral force. There should be a united force of people coming together, especially those of us who claim this book to be our sacred text. There ought to be a force of righteousness that comes together today, like those who were with Dr. King, who came together to say enough is enough. Yes, we will still be on the backs of buses, but a force came together. We will still not be allowed in some restaurants, but a force came together. We got the Voter Rights Act because a force came together. We got the Civil Rights Act because a force came together. But isn't it interesting that even when good is being done, evil keeps on showing up? And that's why the undoing of the Voters' Rights Act came even in the lifetime of John Lewis, who bled to get the Voting Rights Act, and we let that get undone. And I heard no white prophetic voices detesting undoing the Voting Rights Act. I didn't see white evangelicals on TV saying, leave the Voting Rights Act alone. I did not see y'all on TV saying there's a problem in housing as a result of racism and injustice. I don't see white brothers and sisters saying we're over-criminalizing black children because of poverty. I'm waiting to hear what those of you with these big platforms and microphones and TV shows all day, every day in the name of Christ. But you never mention blood being shed by Ahmaud and by George Floyd and by Breonna Taylor. You never talk about overcrowded jails because of unfair sentencing and a war on drugs. There was not a war on drugs. It was a war on the poor and on the black and disenfranchised. So I close today to say it's time for the righteous to go on attack all together under one banner. And that banner is not a flag. That banner is a cross. If you claim the cross of Jesus to be your banner, you ought to come together. We ought to get together under the banner of the cross. For the cross is not simply a piece of jewelry to wear around your neck. The cross is an emblem of suffering and shame. It's a reminder of one who came down and got involved with those who were oppressed, who needed to be liberated. Jesus Christ died as an emancipator to set the captives free. And if you're going to follow Jesus, you've got to set the captives free so little black boys and little black girls can become executives and leaders and teachers and scientists. Yes, it's time for a call to justice. And I call you now to stop preaching until you can say justice. Shut your mouth until you can call Breonna's name. Shut your mouth until you can call Philando Castile's name. Shut your mouth until you can overcome with us racial, structural, systemic injustice. And then God will heal.
We sincerely hope you're enjoying the ministry of Bishop James Dixon. We also hope you appreciate the work we're doing to impact our community and the world. To keep up with Dr. Dixon and all we do, follow Bishop Dixon on all social media. Subscribe to his YouTube at Bishop James Dixon. Follow Bishop D on Facebook and Instagram. Stay connected and you'll be amazed at what we're doing to impact the world for Jesus. Stay connected and stay empowered by faith.
I hope the message of prophetic call to justice has blessed you this week. And it's an honor to share these messages directly with you because the Community of Faith is a battleship church. I am a prophetic teacher and preacher. And yes, God is prophetically calling us to justice. Thank you for tuning in and thank you for praying for us and thank you for supporting. You can do that today, of course, financially. Text the word give to the number that's on your screen and you can make a donation right now or do it through our website. It takes people like you who are really believers in the power of God's word to keep a ministry like this on the air. So thank you for sharing. And don't forget to tell your friends and neighbors about it and join us next week for another empowering word through Empowered by Faith.
We thank you for tuning in today. We're certain this end-time message has been relatable, resourceful, and is refueling you to want to make changes in order to be a change agent for yourself, your family, your community, state, and yes, this nation. This is not it. There's more. To receive this message in its entirety, simply go to thecommunityoffaith.org, click on the e-giving prompt. Here you'll click on the donation button, and you'll find this message available as an MP3 or MP4. Or you may purchase by text, texting the word GIVE, that's G-I-V-E, to 713-338-9011. Select this message and format preferences. Both are secure ways to obtain this message today.